So I'll just get started, and as I'm going, I'll just admit anybody else that joins in, and because I just do a little bit of an introduction and some housekeeping first so that everybody's kind of aware what's going on. So I'll just start with that. Mostly people normally keep themselves on mute just so that we can hear you. But there is obviously opportunity for anybody kind of to ask questions. So if anybody wants to, then feel free to kind of just either drop them in the chat box, or there will come a point where I can invite people on kind of live to chat face to face, if that's okay with you, Dicken.
Can I just ask how long we're going so I have a sense?
Yeah, about an hour, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Perfect.
Good. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so yeah, if anybody does have any questions, then you can drop them in the chat box, just at the bottom, or just raise your hand, and then we'll get to those, and I'll make sure we've got some time for that as well. So yeah, just so you know a little bit about the summit, and so that everybody who's new to it, maybe I'll just share a little bit about it, because, and the reason why I kind of created it, I guess, because it's called the Self-Rediscovery Summit, and I think many people kind of arrive at the self-rediscovery journey, and myself included in the past, kind of thinking that we need to fix or change something, and and to an extent, I guess we kind of get to play in exploring who we want to be in human form. But for me, it's kind of more importantly about seeing who we are, like deeper beyond that, I guess. And for me, that looks like wisdom. So for me, that's what it's kind of like. It's like rediscovering the wisdom that was always there. So this topic is kind of perfect. And I'm excited to dive into it. And we've been kind of exploring a different range of topics, obviously kind of pointing towards the same wisdom all the way through. But it's kind of been, yeah, just really nice kind of exploring with different people, and you were a speaker that's kind of spoken to me, I guess, through my journey. You're one of my favorite people to listen to, and so I know when I announced that you were coming to join us, somebody was really excited and said it was like receiving a warm hug from wisdom, and I was like, yeah, I know what you mean. So I guess that's the best way to kind of introduce you. Sorry, I'm still just admitting people here. But yeah, and I guess for anybody who maybe doesn't know you, then I'm just going to kind of formally introduce you, and then we can go into the more human conversation, I guess, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, you received your undergraduate degree and began your career teaching high school students who would come to you with problems, which led you into a search for something to teach people that would increase their well-being. I'm kind of taking this from the information that you sent. Receiving a master's and doctoral degree in counselling psychology from Boston University, you became licensed as a clinical psychologist in 1983. And 28 years ago, you met Sydney Banks, who had an enlightenment experience where he realised the three principles that underlie all human experience. And in this, you found universal principles that you could teach anyone, or at least point to, I guess. And so you were grateful that there was something so simple in nature that could have the profound effect on raising the quality of a person's life. And I think that's something that I've very much seen through my own journey as well. Yeah, and then you kind of learnt directly from Sydney Banks. You were one of the early authorised teachers, and you co-founded and were the director of the centre in Vermont that was the first centre to teach the principles, and served as one of the original nationwide core faculty. And you're currently a faculty member for the Three Principles Global Community. You joined Pransky and Associates, an institute in Lacona, Washington, and were instrumental in developing and teaching leadership and staff development programs for universities, hospitals, publishing companies, defence contractors, health departments, banks, non-profit organisations, as well as individuals, couples and families. So that's pretty much everyone then. So that's a really beautiful journey. Yeah, so I guess that's kind of the formal introduction, but
I guess so.
yeah. So what I guess I want to get to is kind of the more fun human bit. So I'm just going to let you take over from there. And I guess the way I usually start is I think people love a shared story. So I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit about your own personal journey with wisdom, and kind of what led you into the realization you had about life that helped you kind of, yeah, helped everything transform, I guess.
I'd be glad to. It's really nice to be here with everybody. I'm loving doing work on Zoom. It's a really nice way to connect with people during all of our experiment in social isolation. So,
I know, it is actually really lovely.
it's
Yeah,
some real benefits for sure.
yeah.
Well, my bio is pretty boring in my mind. I think what's interesting is not what people have done, but what they've learned that's opened their hearts. That's all I've ever been interested in. Does learning about something help open my heart? And is what I share with people, does it help open their hearts?
Yeah, that's
So
gorgeous.
my teacher, a man named Sidney Banks, ordinary guy, ordinary, a welder, ninth grade education. And he had something very rare for any of us, as a spontaneous enlightenment experience. And he went from being a very insecure welder to being a world teacher. And so that was really life transforming. So I'll talk a little bit about why his teaching is so relevant to each of us. But Nicole, you asked me to say something about my story. Well, I didn't do very well in high school because I wasn't all that interested in academics. I was totally interested in sports. I could be totally insecure in my life. And as soon as I stepped onto the field or the court, it's like my head would clear and all my insecurity would go away. And I just would be in love with people and life. And sports was my passion because I thought that was the only way I could feel fully alive. I was all tongues when it came to talking to people. Really, it wasn't until college that I could talk comfortably with women. So I began my career, I was 22 years old, and I began teaching, and I looked to be about 16 at that point, maybe hard to imagine, but I looked very, very young, and I'm teaching high school kids who look much older than me. And I think maybe because I looked so young, kids were really open with me. And I had so many kids coming wanting to talk because they saw me as an adult who really listened and cared about them. And every kid had stories about their own personal struggles and insecurities and how difficult things could be at home and abuse and problems in all their relationships. And, here I am, an English teacher, but I had studied an awful lot of communication. So I would share with them what I learned about communication. Plus, I loved them. That made a difference. I cared about them. Teachers would always talk about these kids are troublemakers. And I'd go, well, I haven't met a troublemaker yet. Give me all the troublemakers in my class, please. Because I started learning that if you treat people with love and kindness and respect, all of their hardness begins to soften. And pretty soon it starts coming back your way.
That's gorgeous.
So I would share with them things about communication, and it was so rewarding to have kids come back and say, this has really helped. I had a good talk with my dad for the first time ever, or I didn't get so caught up and my boyfriend or girlfriend's upset, and was able to talk to him about it in a way that was helpful. And it was so rewarding. And at 22, that became my passion. I have to find out more about what you can share with people that will make their life easier. And that passion has not gone away. It's actually gotten stronger. So here I am, 72 instead of 22. And I'm just as passionate about this. I went back to school to get my master's and doctorate in education because they saw people as being healthy, and if people were having difficulty, they weren't ill. They didn't have a social problem. They just plain and simply hadn't learned what they need to learn in order to do better in life.
Mm.
Isn't that kind?
Yeah.
Isn't that kind? And so I found people in universities who were very interested in how education can help awaken well-being in kids. And there were a number of really wonderful people around the world that were interested in that. So that's what I studied. And then I found a doctoral program that trained psychologists in the education department. And I was so excited. I'm so excited. I still see myself as a mentor who thinks that knows that every human being has the capacity to have new thinking about things, insights, and that insights are the basis of all true change in people. All change is a function of something new occurring in us that changes how we see life or feel or respond to people. And I love the fact that it's in our nature, it's built into us. Okay, I'll take a long story and try and make it really short. For 10 years as a psychologist, I studied with amazing spiritual teachers and people who were in the vanguard of psychology looking at well-being. And I found amazing teachers and studied with them or meditated with them and read voraciously spiritual and psychological books. I'd go into a bookstore and I'd be disappointed because there were no books I hadn't read. And I was meditating 4 hours a day. I was doing dream work, trained myself to wake up at the end of REM sleep. Wrote down 5 full-length dreams every night to work on. I did dialoguing with dream characters for years. I did affirmation notebooks. I did journaling. I did free-form writing. I did all kinds of therapies, past life regressions, Gestalt. I studied the mystics from every religion. That's one of my passions. And then I meet this guy who's a welder. Ordinary guy, Sydney Banks. I had been practicing for 10 years, loved my work. My wife used to say about me at that point, I've never met anybody who works harder on themselves than you do. And I said, well, thank you. I took that as a compliment, even though most hours I was absorbed in my own self-development. innocently. I mean, I didn't even see it that way. I just said, I mean, it was helping me. I'm not in any way putting any of that down, but I thought it was necessary
Yeah.
to develop well-being.
Yeah, it's really interesting because that's kind of been my own journey. I had chronic fatigue syndrome about 10 years ago. And when I had that, I felt like I needed fixing. And so I kind of did much the same as you, and really kind of exploring all the different self-help things only really served to exhaust me more.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was having a conversation with a client earlier, and we were talking about how the kind of, for me, it felt like a need, whereas now I see that we can play in all of those different things if we enjoy them.
Yes. Yeah. You see, people can have insights anytime, anywhere that raises their level of consciousness. Sometimes practice helps people look in a direction where they're more likely to have insight. That's great. That's wonderful. It's not a requirement.
Yeah.
And so I met a man who became enlightened, and he had no practice, and he didn't read, and he had no teachers, no teachings, but he had a couple of insights that radically transformed his life. And then as he shared those, pretty soon hundreds of people from all over the world are seeking him out. And he had no practices to offer. He said, I've discovered what's fundamentally true about every human being, and I want to point you in that direction. And if you look in that direction, you're most likely to have an insight. And if you have an insight about our true nature, guaranteed it will raise your level of well-being. And I was very, very skeptical, but interested. And in listening to Sid Banks, I started having realizations that helped me become more meditative throughout my day than when I was practicing hours a day of meditation. So that got my attention. You can imagine, Nicole, after all the hard work I was doing, I was discovering that there are some universal truths. And so I want to jump to Sid's enlightenment experience and why it has relevance for every single person on this planet. He said he wasn't looking for it, he wasn't trying, but what effectively happened is that he fell out of his intellect. Now that happens a little bit for each of us every day, so it's no biggie. Disengaging from all concepts, and then metaphorically, your mind gets a little quieter when you don't have a lot of thinking on your mind, when you're present, right? We all experience that. All throughout the day, we drop out of our conceptual world into the now. But there are people throughout the world who talk about it as that there's always deeper or higher. They're just metaphors. And they're ways of talking about the depth of realization that any of us can have. And it's very helpful. I love the fact that there's infinite levels of consciousness, and that at each level that you touch, you become more loving, more understanding, more compassionate. So there's no end to us being students. I'm not a teacher. I am not a teacher. I am an avid student in life. And I learn as much talking to my clients as they learn from me, because we can have insights anywhere once you begin to know where to look. And that's where Sid was a nice guide. That's cool. It was really ordinary. He said his enlightenment experience didn't seem extraordinary. It's just an ordinary human being who fell out of his thinking. And sometimes when I fall out of my thinking, it just feels so spacious and vast, and it's just presence, awareness, and it's very lively. It's a very beautiful space. It's not even dependent upon what mood you're in or what you're feeling. It's just a space free of the noise of our conceptual mind.
Mm.
But in his experience, he experienced that so he could talk to us about that in a very practical way, so that we can all get a glimpse of stepping into a inner space of absolute freedom, free of, just think for a minute, how much of our thinking is filled with some degree, it's a label, which is reducing this enormous field of life to something small and thinkable. It's a judgment. Oh, I don't like it's raining out. Oh, bummer. You know, it's unbelievable how many judgments pass through our head, or it has shoulds. I should feel better. I should become better, and it's going to take time, and I got to work on it, and we have a constant flow of concepts and thinking in our mind. I was lost in my thinking, even with all my spiritual teaching and training. I had this ongoing dialogue that I paid a lot of attention to.
Mm.
All right, so Sid started falling out of his intellect, and then he said, for whatever reason, he spontaneously kept going so far beyond the pull of intellect. Now, I have a lot of grandkids, and I've held them as babies, and they're in life, but they have zero concepts about life.
Mm.
The Tibetan Buddhists call it newborn consciousness, and they say if our minds get quiet enough, we step into newborn consciousness and we see life without labels and concepts.
I love that.
It's absolutely beautiful. If I go for a walk and my mind gets that quiet, every single thing I look at is beautiful.
Yeah.
I just went for a walk and there was a clump of tar on the road. And when I looked at it fresh, new, it was beautiful. I bent over and touched it. It was just a lump of tar, it's just, and then I look at a tree and it's this breathing, vital, living being. And there's an intimacy in the now, or in the deep now. As Eckhart Tolle talks about, the deep now, as opposed to surface now, as just, oh yeah, hi, there's a tree, there's a person, there's a, yeah, no, 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 no. And then there's quieter, and then there's quieter, and then there's real quiet, and then there's stillness, and then there's no meditator, no person, no sense of self separate. And so in Sid's enlightenment experience, he went from being in his thinking to falling out of his thinking to being fully awake and present in the now to going deeper. And then he said, suddenly there was this all-encompassing field of white light. And he fell into that, and his whole sense of personal self dissolved into the realization that all of life is an infinite field of energy, and that everything that we see is a small fragment of formless energy dancing into form.
I love that. That's gorgeous.
That is not new. There have been mystics and scientists in every culture at all times who have had that experience. We said, Sid, did you have a near-death experience? It sounds exactly like a near-death experience. He says, no, in a near-death experience, you go into that light and then you realize you're not done, and then you come back. This was, I went all the way through the light to the other side, and it was just infinite nothingness. He said it was a full death experience. Now, there is literature in the spiritual traditions of rare human beings experiencing complete ego death.
Mm.
Right? So even that is not only attributable to Sydney Banks. But what was different about Sid and his teaching was that he realized spontaneously while he was, if you were, there's no words for this, and I'm certainly not qualified, but I'd tell you, the way he pointed people in this direction has changed my life, and it has changed hundreds and thousands of clients I've talked to. So there's something he discovered, something that made this more shareable, more ordinary, not with requirements of years of work and effort and meditation and practice. And it's the discovery of our perfect innate well-being that never needs development or improvement. And that we're all enlightened beings, but for our thinking that creates concept, that creates separation and difference, giving us the illusion that we're not part of this one whole. All right, okay, so this is just a little background, but what was refreshing about Sid, because I had studied the teachings of many enlightened beings before that, was Sid says there are three fundamental elemental characteristics of infinite spiritual energy. He says one way of talking about what's always true about infinite field of energy that we're a part of, in the same way a wave is not separate from the ocean, it is the ocean. We, as beautiful human beings, are at one with the ocean of energy, spirit, consciousness. And in a minute, I'll tell you the practical relevance of beginning to get a sense of that, because it's so dog shit ordinary. It's just practical, down to earth, helping us with the screaming kids and being isolated and feeling lonely or anxious or worried or upset. Or I had the virus for 17 days, and it helped me enormously going through it, and came out the other side with even more realization of how ordinary this is and how available, and how we can each live walking around in life full of, in a more meditative state, with our hearts full and our minds empty, right? So Sid realized that this boundless infinite field of energy has one characteristic: is always out of the apparent formlessness, things dance into form.
I really
So, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I really love that. This thing that you said earlier, formless energy dancing in form. That just really speaks to a place of truth, I think, in me.
When I get quiet, my thoughts dance into form, and then they dissolve and disappear. My feelings come up and they're like clouds. And then if I'm just in presence, I'm not focusing on them, thinking about them, labeling them, trying to fix them, improve them, change them. It's all God dancing. It's all God dancing. It's all the same. We can conceptually start saying, good God, bad God, good feeling, bad feeling.
Yeah, like with our thoughts, right? I mean,
good thought, evil thought, and then we start believing our own story, and then we suffer.
Yeah.
Okay. He goes, okay, one characteristic of this field of life energy, spirit, which the scientists say is 97% of the universe, the visible universe only takes up 4%. Well, our body is not who we are. That's our 4%. We're infinite spirit beyond that 4%. 96% doesn't cut it. You
Wow.
can't put infinity into a percentage point. But it's a metaphor. So science is using this metaphor. Every single thing in the physical universe, if you put it all together, only makes up 4% of the universe. The rest is dark matter and dark energy.
Wow.
And that's what Sid realized. Who we think we are, we're not. We're spiritual beings who have a physical form. Hallelujah. It's a very cool creation. All right. So his first realization is that he called it universal mind or divine mind, which is the infinite field of life energy or spirit and matter together. The 100% is mind, and the essence of mind is not our brain. It's a field filled with intelligence. So we're going to talk about wisdom, which makes this practical. All right. So we're born of intelligence.
Yeah. And I think when we put it into like practical form, I guess there are lots of different words for that, lots of different labels.
Yeah, there are lots of words. As soon as we go into our intellect, there's no end to labels we can use to describe, but it's different to experience it than think about it and label it.
Yeah.
All right. So he goes, the very nature of the universe is wise because it knows how to create and operate everything in the universe.
I know, it's magical.
So our very nature as human beings is this intelligence. It's what's living us right now. It's what's beating our hearts. It's what's creating our psychological experience moment to moment. Right? This is an embodied spirituality because they can't be separate. The psychological and the spiritual can never be separated except with concepts. Okay, then he goes, everything that's created, every cell has a degree of awareness because it's created from awareness itself. So every human being is an aware, conscious human being. And consciousness is not within our physical body. We are in an infinite field of consciousness. So as we fall out of personal thinking in our conceptual mind, we start experiencing greater and greater expansiveness of awareness. So we talk about higher levels of consciousness, which are available to every human being. Right? So that's the second characteristic, which you call divine consciousness or universal consciousness. And we're part of that consciousness. So we're conscious beings, human beings. Human is form, being is formless. So the being part is wise and it's aware. And the third one is everything in Formless takes very specific, unique forms. So every flower is different. Every tree, I look out, there's 10 birds right here. That each one is different. It's like the uniqueness of life is created. So the power to create from nothing into something, he called the principle of thought. Because in human beings, it's that power that creates everything I experience. It's created moment to moment from a formless power. If we understand that, we couldn't possibly say things that are already created are making me upset. Like traffic is bumming me out. The weather is making me feel bad. What this person said to me is making me really angry. My kids are driving me crazy. I lived in that world before I met Sid Banks, even with all my psychological and spiritual training. And Sid comes along and says 100% of what you feel is created from formless life energy. That's the only thing that has the power to create. And The quantum physicists agree with this, and the mystics agree with this, and have been saying this for a very long time. Okay. You asked me to talk about wisdom and bring it down to earth, ordinary, 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 ordinary. Because this intelligence has been guiding us through life, our whole life, often without us realizing how ordinary it is.
Mm.
Now, I want to give some extremely ordinary examples.
Amazing.
Extremely ordinary examples. Okay, all of you have to walk through your house or apartment. If you're completely caught up in your conceptual mind, you're thinking, while you're walking, you'll bump into things. You know, you see the videos of people walking down the street and they walk right into street poles. It's just like full on walking full speed, their heads down, thinking up a storm. You hear about all these stories about people crossing the street and they're texting and they're in their personal computer mind, and the rate of accidents at crosswalks has gone up exponentially because nobody is in the now. Everybody is in their screen, in their laptop, in their, which is really just being in our own personal thinking.
Mm.
All right.
Yeah, and when you were talking about personal thinking there, I just wondered if you could touch a little bit as well, maybe not now, but on kind of the difference, I guess, between the power of thought and what we mean by the power of thought and then our personal thinking. Because
Okay.
there's kind
I'm going to say something about that right now because it's relevant to our discussion about wisdom.
of
Okay. It's very important for us, I think, to gain a deeper sense of the connection between our spiritual, formless nature and our psychological experience, because we live in our psychological experience from the cradle to the grave. If we didn't have a psychological experience, we couldn't think, we couldn't feel, we couldn't have we wouldn't have senses, our mental activity would be flatlined. You take away the principle of thought, you don't have a human being. Principle of consciousness, you don't have a human being. The principle of mind, you don't have a human being. So it's very helpful, I think, for people who are interested in experiencing more their spiritual nature, which can only happen when we drop beyond our concepts, our ideas, our personal story, because otherwise the only thing we're experiencing is our own thinking. I could think for the rest of my life and I wouldn't discover love or wisdom because you can't experience those while you're thinking. Right? So this is a teaching at the heart of all spiritual teachings and true psychological teachings is that the good news is we can become aware of the fact that we're caught up in our thinking. What is our thinking or our personal thinking? It's any thinking we're doing. And it's thinking that takes us out of the now.
Mm.
The now is when we're fully present or listening to life with nothing on our mind. And as soon as you think, you leave the present moment. Like you can tell when you're at a party, when you're with someone, can't you tell that the very instant when they're not listening to you while you're talking?
Mm.
How can you tell? You see them thinking. You see their eyes drift off. You see them being preoccupied by something going on in their head. And it's easy as can be to tell. But we're not very good at noticing that in ourselves. That all psychological difficulties and problems and suffering happens when people are in their personal thinking.
Mm.
And that when people fall out of that, it's what Eckhart Tolle calls stepping into the now. Sid Banks called it stepping into pure consciousness, which is awareness free of the noise and influence of our personal thinking. We're just not listening to our thinking anymore.
Mm.
And those are moments that we experience every day where we enjoy whatever we're doing. Because you can't enjoy while you're thinking about life. You can't. It's when people are enjoying themselves, they're really present.
Yeah, and then of
And
course we think that it's the thing that we're doing that's giving us that feeling.
thank you. Thank you, Nicole. That is so true. Very innocently, we can blame any feeling, whether we're feeling depressed or anxious or angry or sad. We can think that has to do with something other than our thinking. If we haven't realized that's the source, not thinking, the power of thought is the source of everything human beings experience. Without that power, we would be unplugged. We would be a dead physical body. We wouldn't even experience physical pain.
Mm.
Our experience of physical pain is psychological, and it's a huge variable. I have been in the hospital quite a bit, unplanned, but 7 operations in the past 4 years. And I've been through a lot of pain. And when I'm in my thinking, it gets worse. This is horrible. I can't stand it. Oh, God, how long is this going to go on? And then I'm experiencing my own story. I'm experiencing my own thing. It's a feeling. And then there are times when I'm not in my story and I still experience pain, but I also see the bird, I see the tree, I see my wife's face, I see the nurse tenderly holding my arm, and then I experience pain, and then I see the clock, and then I see, and it's what Krishnamurti calls choiceless awareness, which is where our health lies.
That's gorgeous.
When we're in our,
I don't know whether you just saw that question about that said what about physical pain when you started
I
talking.
did.
Yeah, you did. I was going to say that's amazing. That's pure wisdom.
I saw it pop up, and so I thought I'd weave that into what I was saying. There's not a single moment of human experience that isn't psychological, and it's a variable. It's a variable. You take 10 people in the worst situation you can find, and it's quite remarkable. There's tons of research on this. Every person has a different experience, and it's not determined by the situation. It's determined by where the thinking goes. Completely. I go to a movie with my wife, you'd think we were watching different movies because we have completely different experiences. It's not the movie. It's not what people say to us. It's how we think about what people say to us. So it helps any human being become healthier because awareness itself is curative. So when we become aware of when we're in our personal thinking, which is what Sid called our ego, and when we're not in our ego and we're just in the feeling of presence. The awareness of that, this deeper intelligence then will keep bringing us more and more toward presence as opposed to being caught up in and lost in our own personal thinking. It's built to do that. That's why it's called intelligence, a deeper intelligence, or why it's called wisdom. Wisdom is the intelligence of life that moves human beings toward thriving, toward well-being, toward experiencing well-being, or it wouldn't be called wisdom, it'd be called stupidity or craziness or that other dumb thing that keeps making me feel worse. And a spiritual teaching is the less thinking we have on our mind, the more wisdom is coming through us. Sometimes the metaphor of light is used. So we can be very heavy when we hold on. When I hold on to my personal thinking, it can get very heavy and dark. When I wake up out of that thinking, because I can see it's creating tension and stress, when I let go of the thinking creating tension or stress, what's left? This. Just this, presence, without story. I'm a baby. I'm open. I'm open and receptive. And the great discovery is any human being touches this space of open, receptive awareness or presence. Any human being when we touch that space, now this is one of the greatest evidence of wisdom in human beings, or our connection to wisdom. Whenever I touch that space and get out of my ego and out of the personal, for no reason, I start to feel better. And for no reason, my thinking becomes new and fresh, or more creatively responsive and helpful, no matter what circumstance I'm in. And I found that to be true when I had bombs going off around me and machine guns in my chest, thinking I was going to die. In presence, I had all the common sense I needed to navigate that horrific situation gracefully, right? Or being with people who are dying, or being with in family crises, or going through great physical pain. And that the now is the greatest doorway for every human being into the spiritual dimension of life, and it starts revealing its secrets to us. It brings us in the direction of greater love and understanding. So a lot of teachers say when our hearts are open, when our minds are open, our hearts open. And when our hearts are open, there's a deeper knowing. It is not of the intellect. And we just know what to do in response to stuff going on around us, even if it's horrific, even if it's family crises, even if it's spousal drama. That our own drama happens only when we're in our personal mind. And when we see that that's creating our tension, stress, or upset, is built into us to let go of anything that we know for a fact in the moment is causing us pain, and we fall wide open. And in that openness, this deeper knowing or wisdom or intelligence starts living us perfectly. Okay, practical. Crossing a busy street with lots of traffic, and you got to get across fast, or you want to get across fast. Okay, what do we all do? If we're thinking about it too much, we're dead. You can't be doing so we get present. And the instant we get present, this is what I love. Wisdom tells us when to go and when not to go without us thinking about it. We know how fast to go. We know when to slow down. We know when to speed up.
I'm not sure that was the case when I was in Vietnam. Right across the road.
Getting across that road, I tell you, if you're in a life and death situation, they don't tell people in case of crises, think yourself into a frenzy.
Yeah.
Which is very interesting, is that most adults, it's just an observation, it's not a judgment. Most adults, when they feel stressed, tension, upset, feel like they have a problem, feel like they don't drop out of thinking so that they can let wisdom guide us through that or make our decisions. We innocently, and I still do this at times, trust me, and I'm no different than anybody. If I lean into my thinking, I'm now living in a very narrowly defined conceptual world filled with judgment. And it gets complicated, gets difficult. So most adults innocently think more when they're upset. But as we become more aware of the difference of thinking that creates tension, stress, and upset, that's a wonderful built-in, nature knows what it's doing. That's God too. Our stress, our upset is like an alarm clock going off to wake us up saying, close your laptop. Get off the screen of your intellect. You know, we say that to our kids, don't we? They're on it too long, and we're saying, you know, okay, you're missing out on life. You're just caught up in a game, and close the laptop and connect with life. Well, I used to spend most of my day on my laptop thinking about my life and thinking about self-improvement and thinking about my meditation and thinking about how to be a healthier person, and thinking about what other people were saying and thinking about what I was going to say. And I lived in my ego without realizing, innocently. And the cool thing, though, is that we can all begin to learn this fact of thought. It's the most beautiful discovery. It's so powerful. I teach it all over the world now. I've taught it to some of the top business leaders in our country. I've taught it to people in prison. It's the most, because we all think our way through life, and most of the time we don't have a clue of how our thinking is creating our feelings. And as soon as anybody I know, any client I've ever had, when they start seeing that my anger right now is being created by the thinking I'm holding on to, I've never seen someone, if they really realize that it's thought creating experience, not circumstance. The instant they see that, without technique, without practice, they let go of that thinking, and it brings them right back to the now. And in that open receptivity, they start having more clarity, more perspective, more common sense, more what I call intuitive knowing.
Yeah.
You don't even have to think about what to say to somebody who's yelling at you if you fall open and this deeper intelligence lives you perfectly. It's always been doing that. It always will do that. In a sense, it needs our participation. How do we learn to have that kind of participation? We start understanding the difference between when we're newborn and when we're in memory and concepts and ideas and beliefs that are incredibly limiting. And there's a feeling to that. So we get very sensitive to feeling to let us know when we're moving in the direction of the now.
Yeah, that was actually a question sent in advance, was how do you know the difference between wisdom and thought?
If I'm thinking about that, I'm in my ego and I'll never find the answer. It's so paradoxical. I used to spend lots of time in my intellect trying to figure out wisdom and what it was, and it's not important. Honestly, anything you think is ultimately a distortion or a lie. When we drop out of thinking, you will learn, or I will say more accurately, wisdom will teach you its secrets.
That's gorgeous.
It will teach you its secrets.
Yeah.
Oh, can I give one example of wisdom in
Yeah,
action?
sure. I'd love you to.
I like this. This was like a 10-year-old girl. The mother was a client of mine years ago, and she emails me and says, I have this daughter, and she is living in such severe anxiety that the school now is really concerned and thinks she has to go into therapy, or thinks maybe she shouldn't be in public school. She's so anxious she can't learn, and she is visibly upset most of the time. So my friend said, would you talk to her? And I said, okay. I said, there'll be very short talks, and since you're in England and I'm here, we'll do it by Zoom, and very short, and I'll meet your daughter, and I'd love you to be there because she likes you and she feels safe with you, and so you be there. So we come on Zoom the very first time, and I'm going to meet the daughter and say hello to her. And all I see is Mom. And we start talking, how you doing? And I'm thinking maybe daughter is going to join us. And then at one point I sort of whisper, where's your daughter? And she goes, sort of saying behind me. She was hiding behind her.
Oh.
So I start talking to Mom, but I'm really talking to the daughter behind her. And I say, to this friend of mine, I say, you know, it's been so neat for you and I to learn that every feeling we have is perfectly normal. Can't have a bad feeling. Yeah, there's no bad feeling. It's super cool to know that, because then it's easier to just have any feeling that you're having without it being a problem. And all of a sudden, over one shoulder, I see a couple of eyes stick out. And I say, oh, you're back there. Hi. It's nice to see you. And then the eyes disappeared. So I keep talking to Mom, and we keep talking about what we've learned that's been helping us about this, and just chatting away. And pretty soon she's sticking her head out, and I say, hi, it's so good to see you. How old are you? And this time she leaves her head out over her mom's shoulder, and she says, I'm 10. I said, really? What do you like to do? And she says, unicorns. I said, oh my gosh, you know all about unicorns? I'm really curious. Could you tell me something about unicorns? We talked for the next 15 minutes about unicorns. I learned more about unicorn. Did you know if you're able to touch the horn that colorful butterflies fly out?
Wow.
And I was learning all kinds of cool stuff. And okay, half an hour goes by. We say goodbye. I talked to her a few days later. She's sitting next to her mom. Right? She's sitting next to her mom rather than behind her.
Aww.
And she's interested, and we talk a lot more about unicorns, and then we talk about favorite things, and she tells me about her what her room is like, and we just have the best old chat. And then for a little bit, I just start weaving into this talk a little bit of what I'm sharing with you, but in a very practical way. You know, we're always thinking, everybody, and whatever we think we're going to feel. And boy, is that helpful to know, because when we realize that, we let go a lot of our thinking. Oh my gosh, it's so beautiful. We start saying, why would I keep thinking about this if it makes me feel this way? And we start letting go of more and more of our thinking. And when we do, whatever we're feeling just comes and goes naturally, and there's no problem with any of them, and we stop being frightened of our own feelings. End of session. I get an email from Mom. Oh my God, I don't know what's happening, but my daughter is not so anxious anymore, and she's enjoying school for the first time. And she came down to breakfast this morning, and she says, Mom, you know what I think? I think every person has a thought factory inside of themselves, and it's working all day long, and it's creating thoughts. And whatever thought is created in us, we feel.
Aww.
She emailed me that. I burst into tears. I'm going, oh my God. Remember I said in the beginning, my clients wisdom can come through anybody at any time. And wisdom is a teacher. So I learn as much listening to my clients when they talk about things they're realizing. And then this is the cool part. I'm all excited about this thought factory metaphor, and I share it with some of my clients. And so next time we're together, I go on Zoom, and she's sitting there by herself, and there's no Mom. And I said, where's your mom? She said, oh, I told her I wanted to talk to you by myself. Oh my gosh. And I said, hey, your mom wrote me and told me about your story about the thought factory. And I've been sharing it with some of my clients, and people are loving this. And she said, but I have a question. Who runs the factory, Dicken? And my first thought, I want to empower her to know that she's the thinker, and that when you realize that, you begin to feel this enormous freedom that if I don't like what I'm thinking about, I don't have to think about it, because when we come back to the now, whatever we're thinking about drops away. So I said, well, you're the manager of the factory. It's your thought factory, and you're the thinker. But she was a step ahead of me. Oh man, this girl was more spiritual than most of my teachers. She goes, so Dick and I have one more question. Who built the factory and hired the manager?
Oh.
And I knew her mom was religious and that they talked about God in their family. So I said the truth. And I said, well, you know that God does. This creative spirit that creates everything in life. It's what creates us, creates all the thought factories, it creates the trees, creates see, that's just the principle of mind, right? That the ultimate source of life is creative, aware, and wisely responsive to everything in life. Right? And we can all experience that directly as we begin to wake up to the fact of thought, not the content. I never try to figure out what I'm thinking because that makes me do a lot of thinking. It takes me further out of the now. It's just seeing what I'm experiencing is coming from thought. It's not coming from people, the world, the environment. It's being created through me. And then that wakes me back up to the now. And then I learned to rest in the now, which is the only place we can find peace of mind. We're a thought away from peace of mind. We're a thought away from happiness. We're a thought away from love or compassion or insight or motivation, aspiration, enthusiasm, clarity, perspective, common sense. So Sid called pure consciousness the space within that every human being is looking for, and very few people look there. And it's where we'll find the answer to everything because it's pure love. So the Dalai Lama says, you know what love is? It's the absence of all of our judgments. What's that? That's the now, that's presence, that's pure consciousness. And we drop into it, but then we blame our well-being and our good feeling on, oh, the sun came out, or my friend stopped by, or, you know, the sun can come out and you can keep thinking and make yourself miserable, even though the sun's out or your best friend is there. It's all an inside out from spirit into form universe. Always has been, always will be.
That's beautiful. I love that story. And I think I probably would have just told her it was the unicorns. Because it could have been unicorns as well, right?
Yeah, I just wanted her, if people don't know that it's thought, it keeps being something other than thought. And I don't mean personal thought, I mean God thought.
Yeah.
Is creating our experience. And if we don't know that, we're going to spend a lot of time thinking about our life and the reasons for why we think we feel the way we do or other people feel the way they do. But it won't necessarily help us live with greater psychological freedom where we don't take our own personal thinking and other people's personal thinking so seriously.
Yeah.
We don't take it so personally. And boy, she went from being a psychological mess to being healthier than most of her teachers.
That's gorgeous.
Just from some insight, not from practice, just from insight, hearing about the principles, about what's true, always has been true.
Yeah, and that's it, isn't it? It's always been there, and we just don't necessarily see it. Are you okay for time, Dicken?
I'm doing good. These
the
days
hour's
I
gone.
happen to have, usually I'd be saying, no, I got a client coming up right now, but hey, I'm good as long as I know it's 9 o'clock in the UK. So it's.
No, I'm good. I could listen to you all night. But I'm just thinking for questions in case because there have been a few questions.
Oh, I would love to. You know, often I go an hour and a half. So the last half hour, I just shut up and people ask questions or share. what they're hearing. So if
Yeah.
anybody wants to do that, I'll stick around.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so if anybody does have any questions or wants to come on live to share or ask a question, then just either raise your hand or pop a message in the group. There's a few in there already in the group chat, so I'm just gonna have a quick read through. Tracy said, thanks so much, Dicken and Nicole. I wonder how can we help to share the idea of perfect innate well-being to those who are experiencing moderate or severe mental difficulties?
Say the last part. How can we share the idea of innate well-being with?
Yeah, to those who are experiencing moderate or severe mental difficulties.
Most often not by our words.
Mm.
Presence is healing.
Yeah.
Rarely are we, if we're trying to help somebody, rarely are we present without any agenda and without any thinking on our mind. And people can tell. And in the face of presence, people, no matter who they are, tend to start feeling safe and relax. And when they relax, it loosens up their personal thinking or their ego. And then people begin to be more open. They feel more comfortable in your presence. That's huge.
Like you said at the start, I guess, showing up as love.
Yes. Yeah. You know where I learned that? From horses.
Oh, I love horses.
I have a friend in Colorado. I did a seminar at her ranch, and she introduced me to the horses, and she said, Dicken, I know you've been my teacher for 16 years, and I know you know what it means to sort of wake up out of your thinking and drop into this no agenda, no thinking presence. That's the only way you're going to effectively be able to meet a horse.
Mm.
That's how they meet one another and know that the other horse is safe and not have an agenda and is aggressive. They can tell. And she said the horses can spot it a mile away if you're present or not.
That's so
So you
true.
can't bullshit the horse, right? So she says, come up to the fence. Don't go to the fence. Don't use words because they don't. And just drop in and see what happens.
Mm. Yeah,
Now, that's just a metaphor for just dropping into presence or the now. I'm very familiar with that space. So I drop in, and she had told me which was the alpha horse. And I looked at the alpha horse, and the three horses in the corral were running around on the back end of it. And I look at the alpha horse with pure presence, and that horse stops running and looks at me across the corral. And then walks right over to the fence and puts its head over and looks me right in the eye. And I'm just like baby meeting baby.
Oh.
And then I look over at the second horse, and that horse does the same thing. I look at the third horse with pure presence. That horse comes up to the flank of the second horse. And then my friend comes back and says, now you can approach the horse. You've met them. They've met you. You passed the test, sort of deal. And then I walked over and she says, if you feel inclined, in other words, if wisdom guides you to, you can touch the horse. So I just stood there next to this horse and we got up pretty close. And I noticed his cheek was huge. And I put my hand up on the cheek and it was like such intimacy.
Mm.
And the horse feels the intimacy, so leans into me and starts petting my hand. I wasn't petting the horse. The horse is petting me affectionately. And then spontaneously, I throw my arm around the neck of the horse, and the horse lays its head over me, and we have this most beautiful, intimate hug. Now, I started to realize, how often do I meet people with full presence? I know that if I walk into a room and I drop into full presence, the dogs and cats and little kids are going to run to my lap. Why is that? Because universally we can tell when people are safe. Teenagers' biggest complaint to be about their parents is they're never present with me. They always have an agenda. They never are not thinking about trying to get me to do something or be something or deal with something. And so it's not so much teaching people who are distressed or upset. It's learning first to be yourself, not your little self. This full presence, open, receptive to universal life energy and wisdom and guidance. Right? It's the key to relationships. It's the key to life. It's the Sid Banks' final talk before he died 10 years ago was talking about pure presence is the answer. It's where love is found, and love and pure presence is the answer to everything facing human beings. And all we have to do is drop into that space, and whatever we need to know in that moment will become available to us. If we're trying to figure out what to say, which I used to do all the time, what to say, how to deal with my kids, how to talk to somebody, what to say, or they say one thing to me and I'm thinking about what they said and how to respond, there just begins to be no presence. So you can see how in a lot of relationships, people start to say, I don't feel close to you anymore. I don't feel the love. I don't know if I love you anymore. I don't know. We're like roommates. And it's not a matter of trying to get the other person to be more loving and intimate. It's us dropping into the heart of love and intimacy. It's us beginning to be more aware of the fact of thought and the experience of ego as a feeling of tension. And then waking up, closing our laptops at those moments, which paradoxically takes us into the intellect's unknown, where you go, I don't know what to say. I don't have a clue what to do, but it's in that space that knowing guides us and happens. Is so paradoxical, and it's so beautiful, and it's so true, and it's so discoverable by every single one of us. Just living ordinary lives. It's discoverable. We begin to see the difference between when we're relaxed in the now and when we're in our story, living in a story, feeling and experiencing the story, and thinking we're feeling life.
Yeah, that's gorgeous. We have another question. I think Danielle wants to come on and speak to you, so I'm just going to unmute you, Danielle.
That's great.
Hi, Danielle.
Hello. Hi.
Hi, Danielle.
Thank you. Hi, Dicken. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I am just feeling really good. And I used to never raise my hand, I just used to really just sit in the space and take everything in. But gosh, I've heard so much just in this call around thought, and I have no idea what I've heard, but it's deeper in the knowing of the difference between personal thought and the formless thinking, so the first thing that occurred to me was that, something that I've been walking around with over the last couple of weeks that I read in your book, Coming Home, was that we are more than our experiences of our ups and downs and our thinking, that we are our limitless creativity, wisdom, and awareness.
Yes.
And I'm hearing you say that so many different ways today, with the 97% versus the 4%. And that just feels so, and it almost just drops you right into that space to see beyond your personal self, just so gently. And that's just where I feel like I am with the stories that you shared and the 10-year-old, and just, I feel like I'm rambling, but you've said so much about thought. So I felt like I had a grasp on what thought meant to me, but man, you've just really opened it up for me. So I want to thank you for telling me again that we think our way through life. And that we're spiritual beings who have a physical form.
Yeah. Danielle, that's beautiful. And it's interesting, isn't it, that we can live in our conditioned thinking and have certain rules about how we are and how we think we are, and that falls away. And then suddenly you're asking questions you didn't even know, or you're saying something. And it's just like this, our spirit is full of infinite possibilities. And we have all these thoughts that are actually limitations. I am this kind of person is a gross limitation. Babies don't have any thoughts about I am this kind of person, I'm not this kind of person, I don't do this, I do this. They just are experiencing life fully. All the feelings, not just bliss all the time. I watch babies have all kinds of experiences, but they have no story about it. And when we don't have story, even when we're upset, there's space in our mind for the light of wisdom to shine through all of us and guide us and help us be kind even when we feel miserable. That's my vision for people. It's neat when I was working with some very gruff, literally drill sergeant engineer men who just could care less about anything spiritual or even psychological, and watch them respond to presence and watch them get excited about seeing the only thing in the way of my thinking more clearly, or enjoying my work more, or being more productive, or having a better relationship with my wife or husband is my own thinking that starts creating, keeps me innocently, keeps me out of the beauty and creativity and resourcefulness of the now.
Yes, it's, you know, when you had mentioned that we make a story up about our feeling, and this is the end of my work day. So as I'm working, I was feeling really good. And I looked at the clock and said, oh, it's because I'm almost off. It wasn't about just being present, you know,
Yeah,
it was just like,
I
oh,
know.
it's because of that, you know, it was just so simple to blame it on something, because it's easy to do when I'm angry or upset. I can blame it on something out there. But when I'm feeling just good, just because, then I'm finding or looking for reasons to explain why I'm also just feeling good. And that doesn't necessarily have to be true. So
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
I become delightfully unreasonable when I'm in the now, can delight in life for no reason. A friend of mine came up with a phrase, feeling good for no good reason. That's what unconditional peace, joy, love, presence always has a quality of embracing life, even while we're grieving, even while we're anxious, but that's flowing through us. We're not giving attention to it and making up story. And it's fun to make up story and live in story. I don't want to make that seem like we don't want to ever do that. I love thinking about things and using ideas and sharing them, but I know for a fact I'm not going to find love and wisdom in my stories. and that we're way more than our words. You know, we're the 96% of creative potential, possibility, infinite oneness, love. That's our true self. That's our true nature, even when we're caught up in ranting. So it's nice to see people that way. It's nice to see ourselves that way.
I love
Oh, wow.
I love, Dicken, how you've just kind of explained that, because I was exploring that kind of with a client earlier who was saying, well, you know, I kind of miss my spiritual practice. It's like, well, you can still play in that, you know, we can still have fun with the power of thought as well. It's like,
There's no shoulds in universal life energy. It's like gravity doesn't say, don't jump off the roof of your house. There's no shoulds in pure energy, in our soul, in our true being and wisdom. But wisdom does move our bodies and our thinking and our feeling toward well-being and toward loving connection to life.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. Joan has also asked a couple of questions and wants to come on. So I'm just going to unmute you, Joan. There we go.
Okay.
Hi.
Well, actually, I don't remember my first question anymore, but the last one was, do I think my thoughts, or do I just experience them? Because I don't know what I'm going to think in a minute. I don't feel like I choose my thinking, sort of.
Yes.
You know,
yeah.
What's the take on that?
In spiritual teaching, they say truth is only truly realized in paradox. And the intellect wants it to be one way or the other. Am I the thinker? I'm not the thinker. And people argue about that forever.
Mm-hmm.
Sid avoided any of those kind of dualistic arguments by saying both are true. Everything we think is an illusion, but our thought-created reality is also true. The Tibetan Buddhists say there's relative truth and absolute truth, and both are true. Absolute truth is there's nobody here. There's no being, there's no thinker, there's no nothing, there's no free will. But we are human beings and we do have bodies and we do think. So there are concepts that are helpful because they point us beyond the limitations of those concepts. So spiritual teachers often use words, but they say over and again, okay, I'm going to use words to point you. They're pointing out instructions. They're just trying to point you toward your true self. I'm going to use words, but don't listen to my words. So they say, I'm going to talk to you with words, but don't listen to my words. They'll say, well, ultimate truth is formless. Ultimate truth is form. Form is God. And ultimate truth is both formless and form, and it's neither. Because
I love that.
The intellect wants to take sides and say one is true and one is not. And so it's easy for people to get caught in intellectual discussions about free will or thought or truth or love, and Sid wasn't interested in the differences. He was interested in, well, what's here when we drop out of all thinking about truth and free will and do I think and who thinks and what's still there always, and what does it show us, and how does it lead us, and how does it guide us? So one time Sid was at a barbecue and he was cooking at the grill and everybody behind him was talking ad nauseum about the principles, and he turned around. It's like, enough talking about these principles. You know, I spent a lot of time with Sid. Probably only 5% of his life did he talk about the principles. The rest of the time, he was just a little kid going through life, enjoying this moment, and being kind to people. Is just like that's what he saw as our true birthright. But, so paradoxes can be fun. It can be fun because it keeps the intellect from starting to think, oh, I know what the answer is. I got it figured out. Right? The intellect can never, ever, 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 ever figure out what lies beyond its own concepts. Can't know what's beyond itself. It's like a computer can't know what truth is. It can store information, it can process it, you can Google, you can, it's all cool stuff, but you won't get love or wisdom out of a computer. You'll get reworked information. If we're thinking about things, we don't discover truth. We don't discover love. Don't discover beauty.
That's gorgeous. Thank you. There's another question from Evelyn. She says, I do grief work around climate change. The idea is that tuning into feelings is useful, as emotional pain is a natural response to the state of the earth. It indicates action is needed. What comes up for you? Are feelings helpful in this way if they just come from thought?
Well, I do a lot of that work too, and I'm very concerned about the environment and how wisdom can lead us toward greater intimacy with nature. And anybody who feels a greater intimacy with nature doesn't need to be prodded to be an activist. When people start falling back in love with nature and life and the birds, and it's because I fell in love with the trees that I'm very active in organizations that work to save the trees or plant more trees or protect the trees from pollution. It's because I fell in love with birds and felt intimacy with them that I am very active in Audubon Society. Is because I know the dangers of certain kinds of energy use, that I covered my house with solar panels. And I see this with people that I work with, is that as grief, upset, all of that is a love letter from God inviting us back to the now. And then wisdom will respond to any crises, any problem, any difficulty more effectively and more directly than anything our ego can cook up thinking it should do. That's been my experience. And so I talk a lot with people about, I do seminars on that. More and more I'm doing seminars because I'm so passionate about the connection between wisdom and the environment, and the wisdom in nature, and how, boy, as we get quieter, we begin to witness the way the intelligence behind life moves flowers to the sunlight and absorbs sunlight and turns it into energy to grow, and how trees communicate underground, and the wood wide web, and just the simple fact that birds can sing and why they sing and the beauty of that. And I just find as we wake up, we become more active, not just in doing things, but in the only way the world will ever change and humanity will change is we literally bring more love and understanding and compassion into the world. And that raises not only our level of consciousness, but the overall level of consciousness of humanity, because consciousness is a complete whole. It's an ecosystem. And as one part gets healthier, the whole system gets healthier. So it's very hopeful. Each one of us can play a part in creating a healthier world and a healthier environment by waking up beyond our egos and our personal thinking and its agendas and strategies, and touching this heart where we become more intimately at love with everything in the world, everything, including the people who are ravaging the environment. And from that place of compassion, we can respond to them in a way that doesn't create more polarity and more hatred and more dislike. And we become part of the solution rather than part of the universal problem, which is not the environment, it's ego. It's ego. Behind every social, political, racial, environmental problem is ego. And as we have to start here, as we start waking up out of our egos and living more free from ego and bringing more love and compassion into the world, we become true activists, bearers of light in the world that really are making a difference. Right? So it's very hopeful. I love that question, by the way.
Yeah,
thanks for throwing me that one.
that was really Really good question.
I'm teaching courses in that,
Huh?
healing the world I'm teaching. And I'm doing a webinar for people in Spain called Caring for the World. And that's sharing more of this.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, you'll have to share the link with us for that so we can have a little look.
Well, that one's for a private group, but I will certainly share the link anytime I gave a talk at the Three Principal Global Community Annual Conference on this very topic.
Oh, amazing.
So,
We have another question that somebody
yes.
said in advance. They said, I've been experiencing a lot of anxiety as like a pit in my stomach with no obvious thoughts associated with it. I'm curious what you would have to say about how to handle it and how to get back to the inner wisdom even when experiencing this.
Yeah, most of my anxiety, and I lived a good part of my life with real, very, very strong anxiety. Most of our anxiety, I have no clue what I'm thinking when I feel anxious.
Mm.
But there's a difference between when I'm anxious and when I'm fully present.
Mm.
And when I'm fully present, my anxiety is background, and the tree and the birds and the anxiety are just all part of the fabric. And only the deep now has the power to cure what ails us psychologically. It's not focusing on it. It's not thinking about it. It's not thinking about our thinking. It's not thinking about what we're feeling. It's beginning to see the difference between when we're wide open, present, and anxiety can flow and come and go, and when we're focused on our anxiety, focused on that's the intellect, that's ego. It focuses on something and holds it. When we're wide open, there's no holding of anything. It's all free to come and go. Every thought and feeling is free to flow and come and go. It's not the absence of anxiety. It's the wide open space in which anxiety doesn't sort of demand full attention. And that pit in my stomach, the more I began to understand thought and consciousness and mind, that pit in my stomach has pretty much disappeared. So hang in there, hang in there, keep listening. Go. I would recommend this to everybody. Just listening over and over again to somebody who saw this as deeply as anybody could see it.
Mm.
Go to www.sydbanks.com. Free talks of Sid's, and you can live stream him sitting in the seminars that I was sitting in, and just listen to those without thinking about it. Listen to those like you would to music. And I guarantee at some point something will shift without your intellect having a clue what happened.
Yeah,
That's how wisdom works.
Yeah, there's such power in the conversations because often it just illuminates something you didn't even know what was said. Right?
Yes.
If you're okay on time, we have another question, which was, what's the difference between thought and thinking?
Well, it's the difference between a wave and the ocean. Our personal thinking is the form the ocean takes, but it's still the same thing. It's all the same. It's all thought. Thought is the ocean plus the wave. Thinking or personal thinking is just the wave. So when I was caught up in my thinking, I'd look out and I'd see other people as separate waves, and I'd see some of them are big waves. And I go, oh, I got to take a webinar or a seminar in how to become a bigger wave. And I would try to stretch myself into bigness. And I'd say, oh, wait a minute, that one has a curl on it. I didn't know about curls. I got to take the curl seminar. And then it was like, oh, that one has rainbow coming off the curl. There must be a rainbow seminar. And Sid Banks just very simply said, yes, there's lots of different ways, but please, Dicken, look down. and I got one glimpse of oceanness, and it didn't matter. It didn't matter. Not one of us has more wisdom than the next. Not one of us is more beautiful or more whole than the next. We all are the infinite ocean of spirit, consciousness, life. All of us are whole already. We're not broken. We're not incomplete. We just innocently are looking from the world of form or concepts at the world of form, trying to find answers. And they can't be found there. That's what Sid helped me to see.
Yeah. And then the last question was, how do we get more of the pure conscious moments and reduce our amount of thinking?
When we get more familiar with pure presence, it's easier to know what we're looking for. If you begin to see that God reveals its secrets to us when we're open and receptive, it gets more and more familiar, and it's more enticing, because when there's less personal thinking, there's more loving kindness and service. We're not thinking about ourselves so much. And then if you learn more about thought, you begin to see how much time you're spending in thought stories. And instead of being caught up in the story, you'll be more interested in how our thinking is creating either tension or no tension. And if it's creating tension, I don't care how great the story is, drop it. And if you drop stories that create tension, you'll spend less and less time being upset. You'll be more and more resilient, and you'll start being taught more and more by wisdom about the true nature of life. So I don't know. I just made up that answer in the moment, but that's what comes to mind. Hopefully it's helpful. If not, ignore it completely.
That's all we're ever doing, right? Making it up in the moment.
Yeah.
That's gorgeous.
Okay.
I've certainly got a beautiful feeling from that conversation. I think that's always, to me, that feels like wisdom, that kind of feeling. So it's a good place to leave it. And there's loads of people writing in the comments now thanking you as well. So
that's very kind. I really feel people here, and I love being able to go to full screen and just seeing all your faces and seeing all the people here. And I appreciate your participating in this, and I hope it was helpful to people. And Nicole, I can't thank you enough for having a stay-at-home party for all of us. And we got invited to this great gathering of souls.
Yeah, no, I've really been enjoying doing it, and it's just nice to every Friday just have this really beautiful feeling, chatting about wisdom in lots of different forms. So it's been really fun. If there's anything you're working on at the moment that you want to share, then feel free to share it, and I'll drop the links as well in with the replay, because there's going to be this is recorded, so everybody who hasn't been able to catch up on it can catch it in the members area as well.
Thanks.
Yeah. And if people want to hear more from you, where can they find out about you?
I hate to say it. I'm so bad at keeping my website up to date. Every time I give a talk and that's open to the public, I put it on Facebook.
Yeah. Okay.
And I've been using Facebook as my way to stay connected to the 3P global community. So I always make sure that I make announcements about what I'm doing on Facebook, like your announcement was there, Nicole. And so
perfect. Well, that's great.
That's the best way. Or you can just go. I did this once and was shocked. If you go to YouTube and put my name in the search, there'll be like 3 pages of my talks. was like,
That's
wow. How
like,
did
what
that
can I
happen?
say?
Where did they all come from?
That's amazing. Thank you so much. I'm just going to do a couple of announcements about the next speaker and a foundations program that I've got coming up in the first week of May. So if you need to go, then feel free to bounce.
Yeah, my grandson just got here.
Oh,
And,
beautiful.
Priorities. So, hey, it's been wonderful being here, Nicole. Thank you. Bye, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Dicken.
Bye-bye.
Take care. So next Friday, the 1st of May, same time, we're going to be exploring a different conversation about authentic manifestation from wisdom, which is with the amazing Dominic Scafidi. So he's here to dive a little deeper in how we can co-create between our humanness and our wisdom. So I'm super excited for that. It's going to be really interesting, and it's a fun one for me because normally manifestation feels quite self-helpy, but when I was listening to Dominic, he has a really interesting perspective that is kind of more truthful for me. It kind of fits with the understanding of the principles. So so he's going to be here joining us next week, and then after that we have Rahini Ross, who's here to share about rewilding relationships. And then also I have an exciting program launching in the first week of May, which is my self-rediscovery school. So that's there's a new program called Self-Rediscovery Foundations, which is really just kind of an opportunity to explore kind of life from wisdom, I guess, and dive deeper into who we really are beyond our narratives. So it's going to be a beautiful journey. I'm really excited. It's basically kind of holding space again for 6 weeks. There's going to be like a video series, and it's just diving into the foundational grounding of the 3 principles of self-rediscovery that I kind of point to, which help us to really rediscover our own wisdom and make sense of life from there and unravel a life we love. So it's a really beautiful group coming together. If you're interested, you can sense into if it's calling for you. I'm still carrying on the summit as well, so that's a really supportive resource to kind of go alongside it. And yeah, there's just more information on the program section of my website, so I'll pop that information again on the replay. But thanks everybody for joining tonight. If there are any questions, I'm always on hand to kind of help and answer. So yeah, other than that, I'm going to leave you with lots of love. Have a beautiful rest of your Friday. Bye guys. Thank you. Thanks for coming.